Have you ever wondered how deeply betrayal can cut when it comes not from a stranger, but from the person who gave you life? My name is Daniel Reyes. I'm 35 years old, financially independent, and to many, I appear to have it all. Last year, I sold a successful tech consultancy firm and moved into a quiet penthouse overlooking the San Diego Bay. No boss, no debt, no rush, just peace. At least that's what I thought. But what no one sees behind the filtered snapshots of success is the truth I've never told out loud until now. The truth about a glass of wine handed to me by my own father. The dizziness, the collapse, the realization that it might not have been an accident. This isn't just a story about money. It's about family secrets, unspoken resentment, and the silent wars we inherit. And it all came to a head on a night that should have been about celebration. If you've ever doubted the intentions of someone close to you or trusted a smile that felt just a little too forced, stay with me. And if you feel something stir in this story, leave a comment, subscribe, or share it. Someone out there might need to hear this too. Now let me take you back to the night everything changed. The coastal air in San Diego that afternoon was unusually warm for late October. As I steered my black electric sedan up the long, winding driveway of my family's estate, the shadows of childhood memories crept in without invitation. My name is Daniel Reyes, and this was the first time I'd returned to my parents' home in over a year. The reason my mother's 65th birthday. She had always been the only light in that house, a soft-spoken woman with ocean gray eyes and a voice that never needed to rise to be heard. Her name is Lucia. Everything about this gathering was meant to celebrate her, but I couldn't ignore the real storm quietly stirring beneath the surface. My father, Carlos Reyes, had once been the kind of man who could command a room without saying a word. A real estate mogul back in the early 2000s, he was the definition of ambition until the markets turned on him. Debt lawsuits and quiet rumors followed. Somewhere along the way, he stopped being a father and started seeing me as an asset, a walking bank account. I tried to brush it all off as I stepped onto the back patio where strings of warm lights crisscrossed the garden. Laughter floated through the jasmine-scented air, mingling with the low hum of jazz. My mother was radiant, surrounded by cousins, neighbors, and old friends. She waved as she saw me crossing the garden with open arms. Her embrace was warm, familiar, and for a brief moment I felt like a child again. "Daniel, you made it," she said, holding my face in her hands. Her lavender perfume instantly transported me to safer times. I smiled. Wouldn't miss it for the world, Mama. But even as I stood there taking in the golden hour light and the scent of lemon cake from the buffet table, my father's presence cut through the calm like a shard of glass. He stood alone under the pergola, a half-empty wine glass in one hand, the other resting in his jacket pocket. He wore a navy suit, crisp and clean, his hair grayer than I remembered, but his eyes hadn't changed. Cold, calculating. We hadn't spoken directly in months, not since he called to ask if I could invest in one of his latest ventures, an offshore scheme so vague I didn't even bother replying. But now, as I tried to avoid his gaze, I heard his voice call out. "Daniel," he said, walking toward me with a slow, deliberate pace. "A drink for your mother's special day." He handed me a glass of red wine, his smile carved like it had been rehearsed in front of a mirror. "Special vintage. I opened it just for you." I took the glass, hesitating only slightly. "Thanks," I said. I tried to keep my tone even. The wine was full-bodied, a little dry, nothing strange. But the way he stared at me after I sipped it sent something cold crawling up my spine. 10 minutes later, the world tilted. The music faded into echoes. My knees buckled. Someone screamed. The glass shattered at my feet. The ceiling fan above me spun slowly, rhythmically, as if mocking the storm inside my chest. I blinked against the soft glow of the table lamp, the scent of lavender still clinging faintly to the air like a memory refusing to fade. My mother sat beside me on the edge of the bed, her hands tightly wrapped around mine. Her eyes, usually so calm, were swollen and red. "Daniel," she whispered, voice trembling, "are you okay?" I nodded weakly, my mouth dry. What? What happened? You collapsed, she said. In the garden. One moment you were fine the next. You dropped the glass and fell. Images flooded back in flashes, the glass of wine, my father's unnerving smile, the sudden rush of heat behind my eyes. I tried to sit up, but the heaviness in my limbs held me down. I only had one sip, I murmured. She nodded slowly, eyes clouded with confusion and fear. That's what I told them. But your father said you were drunk, that you had too much to drink before dinner. I stared at her, stunned. He said that her fingers tightened around mine. I know you, Daniel. You never drink much. And I watched you take only one glass. That's why. Something doesn't feel right. A silence fell over the room. The ticking of the old wall clock felt louder than necessary. I studied her face, trying to read the thoughts she was afraid to say aloud. Finally, she stood walking to the window, looking out at the now empty garden where the party had scattered like dry leaves in the wind. You were just like my father, she said quietly, the night he collapsed. I turned my head slowly. Grandpa Alejandro. She nodded. It happened when I was in my 20s. He was strong, healthy, no known issues. But one night, after a quiet dinner at home with your father and me, he collapsed in his chair. Same symptoms, dizziness, shortness of breath, passed out, cold. He never woke up. I swallowed hard. They said it was a heart attack, didn't they? That's what the doctors ruled it as, she replied, still gazing into the night. But something always felt wrong. I saw the way Carlos reacted, too calm, too quick to move on. A shiver ran through me. Did he drink anything that night? She turned to face me, her voice cracking. He had a glass of red wine. Your father poured it for him. It hit me then like a jolt of electricity through my spine. The connection, my collapse, my grandfather's death, the wine. My mother returned to sit beside me, her face pale. I don't want to think it, Daniel. I don't. But when I saw you lying there, it was like watching the past happen all over again. I felt something shift inside me. A growing sense of dread met with a colder clarity. I couldn't dismiss it anymore. I need to know the truth, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Not just for me, but for you. For him. She nodded slowly, her fingers trembling in mine. Thanksgiving arrived cloaked in the brittle chill of late November. The Reyes family home stood like a silent sentinel under gray skies, its windows glowing with warm light that didn't quite reach my bones. I sat in my car for nearly 5 minutes before stepping out, my fingers wrapped tightly around the steering wheel. The engine idled, but my thoughts raced. I had returned not as a son, but as a witness, a quiet investigator in the middle of his own case. The suspicion that had taken root weeks earlier had now bloomed into something more dangerous intent. Inside, the scent of roasted turkey clove and cinnamon greeted me. My mother met me at the door, her smile gentle but visibly strained. She tried to pretend things were normal, but her eyes darted toward the dining room more than once. He's already poured the wine, she whispered to me when we hugged. Just be careful. I nodded. I was past fear now. What I needed was clarity. The dining table was beautifully set full of candlelight and copper-trimmed plates. At the head, as always, sat my father. Carlos looked sharp as ever, his navy suit perfectly pressed, his hair slicked back like a man still clinging to the illusion of power. In his hand was a glass of deep red wine, nearly identical to the one he motioned toward at my place setting. "Daniel," he said, voice smooth as glass. Feeling better these days, I sat down across from him. "Much better, thanks for asking." He raised his glass. To family, to fresh starts, and to giving thanks. He smiled as he pushed the second glass closer to me. "Drink, son. This one's special." That word again, special, dripping with forced warmth. It rang like a silent alarm. I gave a faint smile, then reached for my napkin. "Oops," I muttered, letting it fall deliberately to the floor. I bent under the table, my hand reaching out in a swift, fluid motion. I swapped our glasses, the one he'd poured for me, with the one he was sipping, and returned upright before anyone noticed. My heart pounded in my chest, sweat gathering at the base of my neck. "Cheers," I said, lifting the glass that was now his. I let it touch my lips without drinking. He took a long sip of his, now mine, and returned to casual conversation with my uncle, as if nothing had happened. I watched. I waited. I smiled when he smiled. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Doubt crept in like fog. Had I made a mistake? Was this all some twisted paranoia? Then it began. His words faltered mid-sentence. His hand trembled. A sudden stillness gripped his face as he clutched his chest. My mother gasped, rushing from the kitchen with the pie still in her hand. "Carlos, what's happening?" He dropped the wine glass. It shattered across the polished floor like broken trust. He staggered, then fell. Chaos erupted around the table. Aunt Sophia screamed. Cousin Mateo called for an ambulance. My mother knelt at his side, shaking him, crying out his name. But I stood frozen, the blood draining from my face, not from fear, but from realization. I had been right. His symptoms were almost identical to mine, the dizziness, the collapse, the ashen skin. But this time, the consequences were real. The dose meant for me was now inside him. As the paramedics arrived and lifted him onto the stretcher, I quietly slipped the wine glass, the one he had prepared for me, into a plastic bag and sealed it inside my coat. I said nothing. I watched his eyes, wide and glassy, trying to make sense of what was happening. There was fear in them. But more than that, there was recognition. He knew. He knew the wrong person had taken the fall. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty: this was not a coincidence. The night after Thanksgiving, I didn't sleep. I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the sealed plastic bag on my kitchen counter. Inside was the wine glass, the one that had nearly taken my life just weeks earlier and had brought my father to the floor hours ago. The last remnants of red liquid shimmered under the dim light like blood caught in crystal. It looked innocent, almost beautiful. But I knew better. I kept replaying the moment he fell, the slackening of his face, the tremor in his voice before the collapse. It wasn't just wine. It never was. By morning, I made a decision. I wouldn't go to the police, not yet. I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof. I drove south to a small, privately owned toxicology lab near La Jolla. It was discreet, the kind of place you hear about from lawyers and corporate executives when they want something tested, quietly. The woman at the front desk looked up as I entered. Her hair was pinned back, glasses low on her nose. "I'd like this tested," I said, placing the sealed glass on the counter. My voice was calm, but I could feel it shaking underneath. "Substance?" she asked. "Wine?" "But I believe it may have been tampered with. Possibly a sedative." She nodded, once professional, but curious. "Any particular compound you suspect barbiturates?" I replied. "Or anything related?" She didn't flinch. 3 days. We'll contact you when the report is ready. 3 days. It felt like a lifetime. I returned to my apartment and locked the door. I drew the blinds as if the truth itself might try to find its way in. The hours crawled. Every knock at the door, every buzz from my phone sent a jolt through my chest. I jumped at shadows, slept with the lights on, ate almost nothing. My mother called, her voice small. "Your father's stabilized," she said. "The doctors say they can't explain what happened. They think it might have been stress or a reaction to something he ate." I said nothing. I didn't have the heart to tell her I knew exactly what he'd reacted to. I waited and waited, until finally the call came. "Mr. Reyes, we have your results. You'll want to come in." The voice was neutral, but I recognized the weight behind it. At the lab, the technician handed me a folder. One bolded line stared up at me like a verdict: barbiturate detected. High concentration. She looked at me with quiet sympathy. This dose could easily cause unconsciousness, even death depending on tolerance. You were right to be concerned. I nodded slowly. "Thank you," I said. Walking out of that lab, I felt no victory, only validation, cold and sharp. My father had poisoned that glass. Maybe not with the intention to kill, maybe just to incapacitate me. But I wasn't willing to give him the benefit of the doubt anymore. Back in my car, I stared down at the report, my grip tightening around the steering wheel. This wasn't just attempted harm, it was premeditated, it was calculated. And then the most chilling thought of all struck me like a hammer. If I had died, everything I owned would have legally gone to him. No wife, no children, no will. He didn't just want control, he wanted everything. A week after the Thanksgiving dinner, my father was discharged from the hospital. Weak and pale, but alive. The doctors called it a cardiac episode brought on by stress. But I knew better, and so did he. My mother called the morning he returned home. "Daniel," she said softly, "your father's asking for you." Her voice carried layers of emotion, exhaustion, confusion, maybe even guilt. I told her I would come, but not to talk. I was going for closure. Before leaving, I tucked the toxicology report inside the inner pocket of my coat. I didn't need it to feel prepared. It was simply my shield, the final truth between us. When I entered the house, everything felt the same, and yet completely foreign. The hallway walls, lined with family portraits, suddenly looked like ghosts watching in silence. My mother greeted me in the kitchen. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured tea neither of us would drink. "He's in the study," she said. "He's quieter now, but still him." I nodded. "I'll speak to him alone." The door creaked as I entered. My father sat by the fireplace staring into the embers. A glass of water rested on the table next to him. No wine this time. "Daniel," he said, not looking up. "I was hoping you'd come." I didn't respond. I simply crossed the room, pulled the lab report from my pocket, and placed it on the coffee table in front of him. The bold text stared up like a verdict carved in stone. "Barbiturate detected. Lethal dosage." His eyes dropped to the page. And for the first time in my life, I saw fear in them, not anger, not scorn, but actual fear. "What is this?" he said, his voice thin. "You know what it is," I replied. "And you know what you did." He opened his mouth as if to lie, to spin, to deny, then shut it again. He leaned back in the chair, hand trembling as it ran across his face. "I only meant to knock you out," he whispered. "I was going to change your will while you were unconscious. I thought I had time. But something went wrong." I stared at him stunned. Even after all I had suspected, hearing him say it out loud hit harder than I'd expected. "You tried to drug me to fake a signature," I said, voice tight. "And if I had died, would you have called it an accident too?" "I didn't want you dead," he said now, visibly unraveling. "But you wouldn't help me. You left me with nothing. You left yourself with nothing," I snapped. "You gambled everything away. You lied, manipulated, and now you're blaming me because I didn't save you from your own failure." He put his head in his hands. His voice cracked. I was drowning, Daniel. Debts, lawsuits. I couldn't breathe. "I saw your money sitting there, and I didn't know what else to do." I stood in silence, absorbing the weight of his words. I expected to feel vindicated, maybe even satisfied. But all I felt was a hollow grief. "You were supposed to protect me," I said quietly. "Not poison me, not forge documents, not betray the only person who still showed up for you." At that moment, I heard movement in the hallway. I turned. My mother stood at the doorway, her face white, her hands shaking. She had heard everything. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know. I never imagined." She stepped inside, her eyes locked on the man she once trusted. "You did this?" To our son, Carlos broke down completely. He didn't try to justify himself anymore. He just cried. Not for forgiveness, he knew better, but perhaps because for the first time he was facing the truth he could no longer manipulate. "I won't go to the police," I said slowly. "But you stay away from me. And from her. From now on, you're no longer part of our lives." I took my mother's hand and led her out of the room, leaving behind the man who once ruled our world, now no more than a broken shadow of himself. The hallway was quiet, but the weight of my mother's words echoed like a thunderclap. She had pulled me aside, her grip on my wrist firm, despite the tremble in her voice. "Daniel," she said, "there's something I've kept to myself for years. Something I didn't want to believe. Until now." We sat in the kitchen, the same one where I'd eaten toast before school as a boy, where laughter used to echo before it was replaced by tension and polite silence. My mother stared into her tea as if trying to read answers in the steam. "The night your grandfather died," she began. "I thought it was strange. He had always been healthy, strong. He played tennis well into his 60s. But after a quiet dinner with Carlos, just the two of them, he collapsed. I felt the chill return colder than the autumn wind. He drank red wine that night," she added. "Carlos poured it. Told me it was a special bottle he'd saved for years, just like the one he gave you." The parallels struck with alarming clarity. My own collapse, my father's obsession with inheritance, my grandfather's mysterious death. Why didn't you say anything before I asked? I wanted to believe it was grief talking. I loved your father, Daniel. I wanted to believe he was incapable of something so dark. But when I saw you lying on the grass and then watched him collapse after drinking from that same kind of glass, the pieces clicked into place. All these years I've been afraid I was married to a man who killed my father. I couldn't stay still. I stood up, pacing, my thoughts spiraling. "Do we still have any of Grandpa's things?" I asked. "A journal, maybe? Something from before he died." She nodded slowly. "He kept a notebook. It's in the safe in your father's study. I haven't opened it in years." We went to the study. The air felt colder there, like the walls themselves held secrets. The safe sat in the corner, untouched, its steel door coated in dust. My mother knelt down and entered the code, her wedding date. With a soft click, the door opened. Inside were real estate papers, old bank documents, and a worn leather-bound journal. She handed it to me like it was made of glass. I opened it carefully, flipping through entries in a confident, elegant script. And then I stopped. The entry was dated 1 week before his death. "Carlos is acting strange. He insists on sharing a bottle of wine tonight. I don't want to raise suspicion, but something in his eyes unsettles me. If anything happens to me if I die, suddenly please investigate." My mother gasped softly. We stared at each other, the weight of that sentence pressing down on our chests. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was a warning, a cry from the past. "This changes everything I said. We need experts, legal help, a proper investigation." The next morning, I contacted a private investigator, Mr. Harris, a man I knew from a friend's business case. I also reached out to Anna, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who specialized in inheritance fraud and elder abuse. Together, they helped us petition the court to exhume my grandfather's body. It took weeks, but the results shattered any remaining doubt. The toxicology report showed traces of a sedative, one chemically related to barbiturate. Not natural causes, not a heart attack. Poison? The courthouse loomed under a slate-gray sky, its stone facade heavy with silence. Inside, everything smelled faintly of paper, old wood, and tension. My mother and I sat side by side at the plaintiff's table, our hands cold, our faces solemn. On the other side of the room sat the man we had once called husband and father, Carlos Reyes. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, fragile. But behind that frailty was the same calculating man who had orchestrated a plan so cold it shattered generations. The judge entered and the courtroom stood. The trial began. Anna, our attorney, opened with measured force. She laid the foundation brick by brick, the toxicology report from the wine that nearly killed me, the lab-confirmed presence of barbiturate, the eyewitness testimony from my mother, and the full medical report from my grandfather's exhumed body showing nearly identical poison traces. But it was the journal entry that changed the room's air. When Anna read aloud my grandfather's words, "If anything happens to me, investigate Carlos," a silence fell so thick it felt physical. The defense tried to argue circumstantial evidence claimed my father had been under stress, that there was no definitive proof he meant harm. But Anna countered with clarity. Intent is shown through repetition, she said. One incident may be misfortune. Two, with identical symptoms, motives and outcomes, financial gain through inheritance becomes a pattern. And patterns don't lie. Then came the forged documents. Mr. Harris, our investigator, took the stand and revealed forged real estate transfers from 20 years ago when my grandfather passed. Signatures that didn't match dates, that didn't align. My father's greed wasn't recent. It had a timeline, a structure, a system. Finally, my mother took the stand. She stood tall despite the pain. Her voice never wavered. She spoke of the man she had loved, the slow unraveling of his character, the day she found me collapsed in the garden, and the moment she realized history was repeating itself. I lived beside a stranger for decades, she said. I ignored the signs because I wanted to believe he was still good. But he poisoned his own son, and I won't let him escape justice again. I felt tears sting my eyes, not from grief, but from pride. She wasn't just a mother seeking justice. She was a daughter avenging her father. When I took the stand, I kept it simple. I told the truth, what I drank, how I felt, what I saw in my father's eyes before he collapsed from drinking the wine meant for me. I handed the jury every detail like a gift wrapped in fire. The deliberation took 2 hours. When the verdict came, the judge's voice echoed through my bones. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder of Daniel Reyes. First-degree murder of Alejandro Fuentes, sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Carlos didn't react. He just sat there unmoving like a statue finally crumbling from within. As the bailiffs led him away in handcuffs, he glanced back only once. His eyes were hollow. There was no plea for forgiveness, only the quiet devastation of a man who had finally lost control. Outside, it began to rain. My mother and I stood together beneath a shared umbrella. The wind smelled of jasmine and wet concrete. "It's over," she whispered. I nodded. Legally, yes, but emotionally? I think we're still learning what it means to be free. Betrayal, when it comes from a stranger, can bruise, but when it comes from someone who raised you, it doesn't just bruise. It rewires your understanding of love, trust, and family. What happened to me wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a reflection of how silence allows darkness to grow. My father had spent years building a mask, one of charm, success, and dignity. But beneath it was something colder, a belief that control and inheritance mattered more than blood. And yet, we didn't let it end there. My mother and I chose to face the truth even when it hurt. We chose justice over comfort, honesty over illusion. In the end, that choice freed us both. Many people carry invisible wounds, often at the hands of those closest to them. If this story moved, you let it be a reminder truth has power. And speaking it can be the beginning of real healing. Leave a comment if you've ever broken free from someone who tried to manipulate or control you. Just write, "I chose truth." It might help someone else feel less alone. And if this story stayed with you, consider subscribing. Not for me, but for the truth still waiting to be told.